PlayStation 2 was no stranger to unique experiences, and among them was a game known as Tulip. It all revolves around a boy who is trying to win the love of a girl, and after his first attempt fails, he sets out to build his reputation by carrying out various tasks for the people of the town and kissing as many NPCs that will let him. Every character you can kiss has a distinct routine they go through on a day-to-day basis. You could say it's a sort of puzzle RPG, where the puzzle is often creating a condition where the NPC can be in the right mindset to kiss you. You can't just plant one on whoever you feel like whenever you want to. If you try to kiss them, or sometimes even get near them, you'll get a firm slap across the face. The amount of damage you take varies depending on the character, but some of their slaps are downright deadly, and if you don't have enough hearts to take that kind of embarrassment, you just drop dead on the spot. Because of this, it can be quite an unforgiving game, but therein lies the real challenge of the experience. Now, it won't be for everyone, but for those looking for a strange and highly unique adventure, Tulip well and truly deserves a look. As the third release in the franchise, Xenosaga Episode 3 carries on the tale of Xion, who is a former employee of an organization known as Vector. After the revelations of the previous entry in the series, she once again is plunged into an adventure that manages to mix both religion and philosophy into an intriguing narrative. For those jumping in for the first time, there are several ways in the game to get up to speed, mainly through the use of a database that chronicles all of the past events, so don't let the number in the title turn you away. Gameplay sees the player exploring the wide range of locations and undertaking a generous amount of both main and side quests that all manage to feel integral to the overall plot. Once in battle, a turn-based system is present that is mainly split up into two different styles. One is human-based combat, with the other utilizing mechs known as ES units. Throughout each encounter's duration, a meter known as the boost gauge will build and grant the player the opportunity to unleash special abilities once filled. Using these ES units sees the bar being swapped out for something known as the anima gauge, and upon filling it, the mech enters a state in which higher amounts of damage can be dealt, as well as actions costing less in which to execute. Although there are some slightly frustrating aspects to the overall game, such as drawn-out battles and conversations, it is never enough to drag down what is a truly captivating adventure. Echo Night Beyond is a survival horror that takes place aboard a derelict spacecraft. It sees you playing as a man known as Richard and is all centered around the exploration of the ship, but not everything is as it seems. Richard is not alone and is constantly haunted by ghosts that occupy the craft. These entities are essentially stuck and are unable to move on until you help free them. The sense of helping them move on from limbo by resolving their various problems gives the game a unique premise that it can call its own. As you make your way through the game, you begin to collect information and various items that will help you free them, and in turn will flesh out their individual stories and details on their life. Now, you have no means of directly defending yourself against these ghosts, and the whole point of the game is to avoid them at all costs, as when you don't, your character's heart rate will slowly rise and reach a critical level that results in a heart attack. This gauge is always visible to the player inside Richard's spacesuit, and it's always a good idea to keep an eye on it and not tread too far into deadly territory. Throughout the environment, a mysterious mist surrounds certain locations, and this is where the ghosts appear. By searching for various control panels on the ship, it's possible to access the ventilation system that slowly decreases the amount of fog in any given area, and by doing so it ultimately allows you to progress further. Although it's not the best survival horror on the system by any means, Echo Night Beyond is definitely still worth checking out. Starting out life on the PlayStation 1, the Silent Hill series has constantly evolved and improved over the years to varying results. Shattered Memories is one of the more positive iterations of the franchise that manages to present the usual formula in a new and interesting way. It sees you taking up the role of a man named Harry Mason, who is trying to locate his daughter after she went missing after a crash. Now, the game is largely split up into two separate settings, the first being a psychiatric office and the second being the town of Silent Hill. During the office segments, you are tasked with answering a series of questions and at time performing specific tasks. They all affect the way that the town is presented when you explore it. This can be the amount of open areas and even down to the way specific characters behave. It's a really intuitive system and will prompt you to go through the adventure many times to see everything it has to offer. One of the key aspects of Shattered Memories is that there is no combat present in the game and is entirely dependent on more defensive measures when encountering enemies, from hiding in lockers and under tables, to setting off flares that will keep the enemies at bay. One facet of the game that needs to be commended are the visuals, mainly the facial animations, which are surprisingly believable and manage to help convey the emotions of all of the on-screen characters, and in my eyes it well and truly succeeds at pulling it off. Obscure is a survival horror that revolves around the events of a group of teenage friends. After one of the group mysteriously goes missing, the others set out to ultimately find him and get to the bottom of the strange occurrences surrounding their school. There are 5 playable characters in total, with each of them possessing their own attributes. They're not all that dissimilar from each other, but there are certain traits that help you out in specific situations, such as being more agile or dealing out more damage. Now in my opinion, Obscure has to be one of the best horror games on the PlayStation 2, mainly because of the various aspects that help it stand out when compared to the others on the system. The game features some really unique ideas, such as using weapons to interact with the environment. You'll find yourself using baseball bats to break windows and gain access to locked rooms, or if you're in need of a drink, you can simply bash a vending machine and collect your reward. This aspect also plays quite nicely into combat as well. Throughout the game you'll be coming into contact with some rather terrifying creatures, and although you have a selection of weapons to choose from and utilize, the use of the environment also plays a role. Many enemies are susceptible to sunlight, so for example, smashing windows to allow more sunlight into a room will temporarily stun enemies and give you the advantage. Another aspect of the game is the reliance on puzzles that are scattered throughout the adventure. They never pose that much of a challenge, but they do help break up the gameplay and involve each of the characters to complete. To top this all off, a neat addition is the multiplayer mode that allows you and a friend to go through the entire adventure together, and in my eyes it's here where the game really begins to shine. Obscure will keep you coming back time and time again, with its range of unlocks such as extra weapons and costumes, and even harder levels of difficulty. It's a game that will just keep on giving. Hack Quarantine is an action RPG and is the 4th installment in the series. It sees you once again filling the role of Kite as you set out on yet another adventure. Now the entire experience revolves around an in-game MMO known as The World, with the game being split up into 2 main styles of play. The first sees you occupying the real world where you can interact with your computer for the use of various message boards, checking emails and reading the latest news. The second, where you'll be spending most of your time, is within the MMO world. It shares a lot in common with the likes of Sega's Phantasy Star Online, and sees you gathering in a hub city as you make a party to investigate the field area and fight through it to either take out a specific enemy or to locate a specific type of treasure. The AI does a really good job of simulating intelligent responses from your teammates, but you can also order them in battle yourself. Each battle plays out in real time, but will pause upon bringing up the menu to select which ability you want to execute. It allows you to take your time instead of frantically searching for your next option. The main ability you'll find yourself utilizing though is something known as the data drain, which essentially hacks enemies and turns them into weaker versions of themselves, but it does affect how much experience points you'll earn at the end of each encounter, so finding a nice balance with this mechanic is key. Visually, Hack Quarantine isn't anything special, but thanks to the overall design of its world it does manage to stand out. Although not without its flaws, Hack Quarantine is an enjoyable adventure that really deserves a playthrough. Haunting Ground is a sort of spiritual successor to the popular Clock Tower series, but this time around players take up the role of Fiona and her canine companion Huey. This duo presents some rather unique gameplay opportunities, with Huey soon becoming an integral part of the overall experience. Now Fiona isn't at all that imposing, but she can kick and tackle enemies, which is all tied to stamina. Upon depleting the stamina, her movements and attacks become a lot slower, and this is where the various hiding spots dotted around the environment come into play, and you'll be using them a lot. To add to this, Huey will always have your back, and although the enemies are quite daunting in their appearance and manner, sending him to attack or distract them is always a good idea. At the beginning of the adventure, he won't always listen to your commands, but by building a friendship with him over the course of the game, he soon becomes a formidable partner. You take control of him through the right analog stick, which has various commands such as sitting, searching, and of course attacking. But as your bond grows, he will eventually learn how to dodge and even increase the amount of damage he can inflict. As you would expect though, he's just as vulnerable as Fiona, and upon being hit he will become just as slow and feeble as she is. It's a really neat system, and in my opinion it stands out as one of the finest aspects of the game. If you're a fan of the several early Capcom survival horror titles, or just the genre in general, Haunting Ground will be right up your alley. The PlayStation 2 is no stranger to quality hack and slashers. One of these has to be Blood Will Tell, which sees you taking on the role of two playable characters that each possess their own unique fighting styles and attributes that make playing as both a truly different affair. Now the objective of the adventure essentially sees you tracking down 48 separate enemies who at the beginning of the game steal parts of your body. By taking each and every one of them down, you acquire the stolen parts, and whilst you can complete the game without collecting them all, it does provide a reason to play through it multiple times. This aspect lends a huge amount of replay value to the overall experience and promotes several playthroughs. Thanks to the incredible combat system, it's one of those games that you'll just want to jump straight back into. The combat system sees you possessing a light and heavy attack, as well as the use of your cybernetic implants that are completely out of context with the game taking place in ancient Japan, but they manage to add a real tactical advantage to each encounter. Figuring out how to string all of these abilities together is half of the fun and allows the player to experiment in order to find an approach that suits them best. Overall, Blood Will Tell is an incredible game. I'm sure you'll come to the same conclusion as well. Rule of Rose is a horror game that sees players assuming the role of a young lady known as Jennifer. The entire adventure revolves around a book which you are handed at the beginning of the game. Many of its pages are blank, but as you progress, the book will start to fill up and provides a way to keep track of all of the events that occur. Now the narrative is the true star of the show and is set in the 1930s in a world that is governed by a group of children who call themselves the Red Crayon Aristocrats. You are basically given tasks to do by these children, which sees you exploring the vast environment and encountering a diverse range of enemies and bosses. Now combat is almost exclusively melee based, and it all revolves around the use of improvised weapons such as pipes, but taking on enemies is never a good idea, and to be honest the game's controls are largely to blame. You'll often find yourself evading instead of confronting them due to the overall vulnerability of your character, but one aspect that alleviates this issue is your canine companion Brown. Although he can't directly attack people, he does have various uses that will help you along the way, such as being able to track items and also distract enemies that may pose a larger threat. Now Rule of Rose won't be for everyone. It's slow, brutal, repetitive and clunky, but if you're willing to look past some of the game's shortcomings, the disturbing atmosphere and events that take place more than make up for it. The PlayStation 2 was home to a whole manner of survival horror games. With the likes of Resident Evil, Silent Hill and Extermination, players were spoiled for choice when it came to the genre. But one game known as Q-On is one that may have passed many players by. It sees you taking up the role of two separate characters as you explore a strange and disturbing manner in the hopes of finding your father. Now the narrative isn't too much to write home about, but it does manage to weave an interesting tale that is bound to keep players engaged. Much like the original Resident Evil, the two characters have their own separate stories to tell, and to understand everything that is going on, it's essential to play through both. On the gameplay front, it's a bit of a mixed bag and could have the potential to turn some players away. This is mainly due to the slow and methodical nature of the gameplay that adds to the overall tension of the experience, but could soon become tedious for those without patience. The manner you explore is occupied by terrifying enemies, but you are equipped with many ways in which to counteract them, one of them being a knife which stands in as your basic defense, but throughout the game you come into possession of various items known as spell cards, which grant you a whole range of abilities. From flaming arrows to summoning puppets to fight on your behalf, they really help out in tight spots, but their use is limited, which makes it a good idea to hold on to them for the more challenging opponents. Overall, Q-On is a fairly forgiving and somewhat easy survival horror game that fails in some ways but excels in others. The atmosphere that the experience evokes is second only to the Fatal Frame series, and this is one of the strongest points of the game. It does require a lot of patience to get through, but if you're a fan of the genre, I cannot recommend this one enough. Well, that does it for today's video. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date on future videos, and as always, thanks for taking the time to watch it. I will catch you next time.